The Spanish Army engineer Miguel Costanzo created this map of the Californias in 1770, using information he collected from the Portola expedition and information found in various diaries from explorers and sailors prior to that period. This video focuses on maritime expeditions along the coast from the 1540s to 1775. Why 1775? The primary reason is that in the year 1775, 4 ships departed New Spain under orders from the Viceroy to sail north to California and beyond. And in that year, the entire California coast and a majority of its harbors were documented and surveyed, including the most famous survey of San Francisco Bay, completed by Juan de Ayala. My name is Bradley Engel. I'm an instructor at the California Maritime Academy, a published maritime historian, and a fanatic of the Pacific Coast. Join me for this quick 3-part video series that accompanies my new book celebrating the 250th anniversary of Juan de Ayala's entrance into the San Francisco Bay. Ayala, the coast of Spanish California. Before 1775, many ships sailed along the Pacific Northwest, but this doesn't suggest that the coast was well documented. One common misunderstanding is the belief that the Manila Galleons transited along the coast of California. The truth is that a vast majority transited out of sight of most of California, and when they did see land, it was at a distance and was below latitude 35. The few that did encounter the coastline were directed to stay a good distance away from it by the Cabrera Bueno Manual, published in 1740, sections of which have been translated in the book Ayala. Even fewer, I've counted 6, actually set foot on California. We know 3 crashed into it, the San Juanito in Baja, the San Agustin in Point Reyes, and the Santo Cristo de Burgos in Oregon, all before the Portola expedition in 1770. Another galleon stopped in Morro Bay, which quickly fled after aggressive interactions with the natives, and 2 more galleons almost ran into the coast of Northern California or Oregon in the 17th century, but ultimately survived the foggy mishap without going ashore. Other than galleons, there was one English ship that scouted the coast for a possible route back to the Atlantic. This was, of course, Drake in 1579. Following Drake was Vizcaíno in 1603, who made it as far as Northern California before turning south, believing he could claim the discovery of Monterey as a great success. Otherwise, we can't forget the Spanish explorer, which was first to visit Northern California, even prior to Andres de Ordante's successful voyage east across the Pacific in 1565. This was, of course, Cabrillo, who sailed with 3 ships as far as the Oregon border in 1540, making notes on the coast as such places as San Diego, the Channel Islands, the Santa Lucia Mountains, Monterey, Point Reyes, and maybe even Cape Mendocino. But Cabrillo and his men never touched the land north of the Channel Islands. One famous misconception that really does hurt our understanding of the early maritime of California is the myth of the fog-cloaked Golden Gate Straits. The myth goes something like, for over 300 years, mariners missed the discovery of San Francisco Bay due to the thick fogs and the far shoreline blending in with the coast. Other than this factoid not really being true, it also creates an illusion that many mariners transited the region, which I've already pointed out to be false, and that the mariners that did transit the region missed the Golden Gate Strait and thus other prominent features of the shoreline due to the horrendous amounts of thick pea soup fog on the California coast. While fog is certainly a common concern for mariners, the mariners we're talking about would avoid transiting the coast when it's foggy. It was just too dangerous. Instead, they would either heave to and attempt to stop making any headway at all, or they would point their bow to the west and await clearer conditions to resume their coastal missions. And like we discussed within the galleons, southbound traffic enjoyed the good winds and safe conditions many miles west of the coast, completely out of sight of potentially spotting the Golden Gate Strait. Cabrillo certainly missed the entrance to the Golden Gate, and so did Drake and Sermano of the San Agustin, and then Vizcaíno, and then the author for the practical navigator for the Manila Galleons, Cabrera Bueno, Working backwards through these mariners again, the Cabrera Bueno manual states directly for southbound mariners to avoid sighting the coast. But if they do, they should stay off the coast until they see Point Reyes, and then be sure to sail to sea before heading south around the Farallon Islands. That brings us to the Farallon Islands. These islands are the most probable reason for the various few mariners to have missed the Golden Gate. It was tough to sail north along the shore. It required a lot of tacking, and being so far from home, the crew was exhausted and had scurvy. The difficult task of tacking was reduced by taking longer routes offshore. When cruising the sandy shores of Monterey, which all of these mariners did, they would tack west to pass Ano Nuevo, at which point they would see the Farallon Islands, and they each had a choice, with two considerations. They could take the narrow passage between the Farallons and the mainland, which required a lot of tacking and would be challenging for the ill crew, or they could go west on a longer and easier route. The second choice would be the Farallons signaled dangers. If there were exposed islands offshore, it was potentially probable that more unexposed islands were just below the surface in between the islands and the mainland. And the risk of hitting these reefs was great enough that it was just safer to go west. Going west around the islands was the route taken by the earliest explorers heading north as they passed Ano Nuevo. And it was the recommended route for wayward galleons coming south according to the Cabrera Bueno manual. The fog-shrouded entrance is a mythical factoid. The roots of this bad history can be traced to an early California lawyer, and then it makes its way into histories well into the 21st century, never once being challenged. The book Ayala reviews this bad history in detail, and it quotes the man who first used the bad history during a legal case in the city of San Francisco. So what did the early California explorers leave us? Cabrillo left us a legacy through his diary, but he wasn't often quoted by his predecessors, and he doesn't seem to have created any charts. Drake gave us what would become The World and Compass, offering a fantastic early review of coastal California travel. Sermano gave us his superior's reports, which were challenged as insufficient and exaggerated by his own crew, and never survived for the archives anyway. Vizcaíno did lots, though his reports were exaggerated. His 1603 expedition resulted in over a dozen maps of the California coast, many wildly inaccurate. The Cabrera Bueno manual is a little better, but it also contains wild inaccuracies. And then there's a lot of nothing, other than a few sightings of land and galleon logbooks. Then comes Portola in 1769. It's unfortunate the history of the Portola expedition was laid out most thoroughly by early 20th century California media companies who had a financial agenda in real estate. Their early histories became the most famous and well-known, and their framework was to create legacy Californians for promotional purposes, not for historical sake. Men like Portola, Junipero Serra, and De Anza became the talking points for over a century, even now still. The mariners of the Portola expedition went mostly overlooked, but they were the ones that allowed the success of the missions. Without the 3 ships of the Portola expedition, there would have been no success in either 1769 or 1770. The opposite is not true, though. Without the land expedition, the maritime expeditions would still have been successful, and could have still taken possession of both San Diego and Monterey. The book Ayala extrapolates on these points. The San Carlos, the San Antonio, and the San Jose all set sail in 1769 to support, supply, and lead parts of the Portola expedition. The maritime legs were the first to reach San Diego. They built the first structures there. Their efforts kept the land expeditions alive with foodstuffs and other supplies. Later, it was the small Spanish outpost of San Diego and Monterey and the few missions between that were 100% dependent on the sailing of these supply ships to survive. In the 2 years the supply ships failed to arrive because of weather mishaps, the settlers nearly all died, and many did. Though none of this suggests that the maritime supply ships of California had it easier than the landsmen, of the first 3 ships to sail, 1 never returned. The San Jose disappeared with all hands in 1770. In 1769, 90% of the sailors of the San Carlos died before reaching or after reaching San Diego, and a large percentage of the San Antonio perished too. Of the 3 captains in the first year, 2 would die. Only Juan Perez survived to lead the naval station San Blas operations until the Big Six arrived in 1774. Along with the first pilot Canizares in 1773, the 2 men completed all of the sailing missions between 1770 and 1774. In 1774, the Viceroy of New Spain ordered Juan Perez to sail north to latitude 60 to do reconnaissance on the coast, searching for foreigners, specifically Russians. Juan Perez was successful in one lens. He certainly pushed the limits of what his ship and his men could do. Though many of his men died, and he himself became so ill he would not recover, and they made it as high as latitude 50, he did not follow his instructions and did not take any land possessions north of Monterey. The unfortunate Juan Perez was doubly burdened by performing a favor for Junipero Serra, dropping him off in San Diego, and making a second stop in Monterey to send orders for Lieutenant Rivera to promote to governor of California. These 2 errands, tacked on to Juan Perez's already extremely intense mission, were the nails in the coffin of his efforts, but he was not in the rank or position to complain or defend his actions. For his failures, he was immediately assigned to return to the Great Pacific Northwest on a second attempt to reach latitude 60 north in 1775, this time under Bruno de Ayala. By 1775, the Viceroy Bucarelli had received 6 or 7 specially trained junior naval officers to use as desired at the naval station San Blas. He immediately sent 4 ships north to resupply the missions, survey San Francisco Bay in preparation for the Anza expedition and settlement of San Francisco, and to reconnoiter the coast to latitude 60, following in Perez's wake. Unlike Perez's orders to scout and take notes, the ships which headed north in 1775 were ordered to evict any foreigners with naval force if necessary. Ayala and Juan de la Bodega sailed as far north as latitude 58, taking possession of 4 areas along the way and completely surveying the coast of what we now call Northern California. Juan de Ayala headed for Monterey, where he worked in concert with the governor of California and Junipero Serra to determine the best method for preparing for Anza. By September of 1775, Ayala had successfully chartered the greater San Francisco Bay region, though Anza and the colonists never arrived. Back in Monterey, by October, Ayala, Bodega, and Ayala were all together, celebrating what was the greatest Spanish naval exercise in the Pacific Northwest ever. Unfortunately, shortly thereafter, at least one captain would be dead. The others would go on to have extremely successful careers in the Spanish Navy. Thanks for joining. Remember, this is just a sneak peek of the book Ayala, The Coast of Spanish California. This year marks the 250th anniversary of Ayala's entrance into the bay and the amazing efforts of the Ayala expedition northwards. Also, check out the other 2 videos in this series. Links below.